The sun hung low over the rolling wheat fields of Harlow's End, painting the stalks a burnished gold that swayed like a restless sea. The air carried the sharp scent of dry earth and the faint tang of diesel from a tractor idling in the distance. At the edge of the Hanson farm, where the fields met a crumbling stone wall, a rusted windmill creaked mournfully, its blades turning lazily in the evening breeze. It was the kind of quiet that felt alive, heavy with the hum of crickets and the rustle of leaves, but tonight, it was broken by a single, jarring absence. The bell was gone. The bell had hung in the old oak by the Hanson barn for 3 generations, a heavy iron relic cast in 1892, its deep toll a fixture of life in this stretch of Nebraska countryside. It rang to call workers in from the fields, to mark Sunday gatherings, to warn of storms rolling in from the west. Its absence was as loud as its chime had ever been. Clara Hanson, the farm's steely matriarch, stood beneath the oak, her calloused hands on her hips, staring at the empty branch where the bell had hung. The rope, frayed and weathered, dangled uselessly, severed clean just above the knot. "Stolen," Clara muttered, her voice low and rough, like gravel underfoot. She was 62, with gray hair pulled tight in a bun and eyes that could spot a sick calf from 100 yards. Her flannel shirt was rolled to the elbows, revealing arms hardened by decades of baling hay and mending fences. She'd run the farm alone since her husband, Eli, passed 10 years ago, and she didn't take kindly to mysteries on her land. Beside her stood her grandson, Jonah, a lanky 17-year-old with his mother's dark eyes and a habit of chewing on wheat stalks when he was nervous. He shifted his weight, kicking at a clod of dirt. "Who'd steal a bell, Gran? It's gotta weigh 100 pounds. And it's not like it's gold." Clara's gaze didn't waver from the empty branch. "Doesn't matter what it's worth. It's ours. And it's gone." Jonah glanced toward the barn, its red paint peeling like sunburned skin. The double doors stood slightly ajar, revealing shadows within. "Maybe it fell? Got caught in the storm last night?" Clara shook her head. The storm had been fierce, wind howling through the fields, lightning cracking over the hills, but the bell had weathered worse. She stepped closer to the tree, her boots sinking into the soft earth, and ran a finger along the cut rope. The slice was clean, no fraying, no tear. A knife had done this, sharp and deliberate. "Someone took it," she said, her voice hardening. "And they knew exactly what they were doing." The Hanson farm sprawled across 300 acres, a patchwork of wheat, corn, and pastureland bordered by a creek that ran dry most summers. Harlow's End was barely a town, 24 families, a general store, a church with a sagging steeple, and a grain elevator that loomed like a sentinel over the flat horizon. The nearest sheriff was 40 miles away in Broken Bow, and cell service was a cruel joke out here. If you had a problem in Harlow's End, you solved it yourself or you didn't solve it at all. Clara turned toward the farmhouse, a white 2-story with a wraparound porch that creaked underfoot. "Jonah, fetch Tess and Amos. We're sorting this out tonight." Jonah hesitated, glancing at the darkening sky. "It's getting late, Gran. Maybe we should." "Now," she said, her tone leaving no room for argument. Jonah jogged toward the house, his silhouette swallowed by the lengthening shadows. Clara stayed by the oak, her eyes scanning the field. The wheat whispered secrets as it swayed, and for a moment, she thought she heard something else, a low hum, almost human, carried on the wind. She shook it off. Just the windmill, she told herself. Just the damn windmill. Inside the farmhouse, the kitchen smelled of fresh bread and coffee, a warmth that clashed with the tension brewing. Tess Harper, the farm's hired hand, sat at the oak table, her calloused fingers wrapped around a chipped mug. She was 30, wiry and strong, with auburn hair tied back and a scar across her left knuckles from a combine accident years ago. Tess had grown up on a dairy farm in Iowa, and her knowledge of soil and seasons rivaled Clara's. She'd been with the Hansons for 3 years, ever since she'd left her old life behind, though she never spoke of what that life was. "Bell's gone?" Tess said, her voice steady but her eyes narrowing. "That's no small thing to move. Takes planning." "Planning and nerve," Clara replied, pacing the worn linoleum. "Someone came onto my land, cut that rope, and walked off with it. In the middle of a storm, no less." Amos Reed, the local veterinarian, leaned against the counter, his broad shoulders filling out a faded denim jacket. At 45, he was the closest thing Harlow's End had to a scholar, with a veterinary degree from Lincoln and a quiet way of seeing things others missed. His hands were steady, used to calming spooked horses and stitching up injured dogs, but his brow was furrowed now. "Could be kids," he said. "Some dumb prank." Clara snorted. "Kids don't carry off a 100-pound bell in a thunderstorm." This was deliberate. Jonah slouched in a chair, picking at a splinter on the table. What's so special about the bell, anyway? I mean, it's old, sure, but it's just a bell. Clara's eyes softened, just for a moment, before they hardened again. That bell's been here longer than any of us. My grandfather hung it when he claimed this land. It's not just metal, Jonah. It's history. It's us. Tess set her mug down, the clink loud in the quiet room. Any enemies, Clara? Someone with a grudge? Clara's jaw tightened. The Hansons had been in Harlow's End since the town was just a dirt road and a dream. They'd weathered droughts, bank loans, and neighbors who coveted their land. But enemies? She thought of the Burkes, who owned the adjacent farm and had been feuding with the Hansons over a shared fence line for years. Or maybe Old Man Carver, the reclusive widower who lived in a shack by the creek and muttered about cursed land whenever anyone passed. But stealing a bell? That felt personal in a way she couldn't pin down. Not that I know of, Clara said finally. But I'll be damned if I let this go unanswered. Amos pushed off the counter, his boots scuffing the floor. Let's take a look around the oak. Might be tracks or something left behind. The four of them stepped into the cooling night, the sky now a deep indigo pricked with stars. The windmill's creak was louder now, a rhythmic groan that set Clara's teeth on edge. They gathered around the oak, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, revealing the churned earth beneath the tree. Tess crouched, her fingers tracing a faint indentation in the dirt, a boot print, wide and deep, pressed into the mud. Big guy, Tess said, her voice low. Or someone carrying a heavy load. Jonah aimed his flashlight toward the field, the beam swallowed by the endless rows of wheat. Could have gone that way. Easy to hide in the stalks. Amos knelt beside Tess, his eyes sharp. Look here, he said, pointing to a spot near the boot print. A small, glinting object lay half buried in the dirt. He brushed it free, a brass button, etched with a faint spiral design. It was old, tarnished, not the kind of thing you'd find in a store today. Fell off a coat, maybe, Amos said, holding it up. Whoever was here wasn't careful. Clara took the button, turning it over in her palm. It felt heavier than it should, like it carried a story she couldn't yet read. Keep looking, she said. There's more to find. They fanned out, their flashlights sweeping the ground. Jonah wandered toward the barn, his beam catching the glint of something in the grass. He bent down and picked up a small, folded piece of paper, creased and damp from the storm. His heart quickened as he unfolded it. Scrawled in smudged ink were 3 words, "The bell tolls." "Gran," Jonah called, his voice cracking. He held up the note, his hands trembling slightly. Clara strode over, her face unreadable as she took the paper. She read it once, then again, her lips pressing into a thin line. "What the hell does that mean?" Jonah asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Clara didn't answer. She folded the note and slipped it into her pocket, her eyes scanning the horizon. The wheat fields stretched endless and silent, but now they felt like a trap, hiding something, or someone, just out of sight. The windmill creaked again, and this time, Clara was sure she heard it, a low, human hum, faint but unmistakable, coming from the direction of the creek. "Tomorrow," she said, her voice steady but cold. "We start searching. Whoever took that bell is still out there." As they turned back toward the farmhouse, a shadow moved at the edge of the field, too quick to be sure. Jonah froze, his flashlight swinging toward it, but the wheat swallowed the shape, leaving only the whisper of stalks and the echo of that strange, fleeting hum. The morning sun climbed over Harlow's End, casting long shadows across the Hanson farm. The wheat fields shimmered with dew, and the air carried the sharp scent of damp earth and alfalfa. The windmill's creak was a steady pulse, marking time as Clara Hanson stood by the oak, the severed bell rope dangling like a broken promise. The note Jonah found last night, "The bell tolls," sat heavy in her pocket, its cryptic words gnawing at her. She hadn't slept, her mind turning over the possibilities, a prank, a theft, or something darker. In a place like Harlow's End, where secrets clung to the land like dust, anything was possible. Clara gathered her small crew in the kitchen at dawn. Jonah slouched at the table, his eyes bleary, a half-eaten biscuit in his hand. Tess Harper, the hired hand, stood by the window, her auburn hair catching the light as she scanned the fields. Amos Reed, the veterinarian, sipped coffee, his calm demeanor a steady anchor. The brass button they'd found near the oak lay on the table, its spiral etching glinting faintly. It was their only clue, aside from the note, and it wasn't much. "We start at the creek," Clara said, her voice cutting through the morning quiet. "That boot print headed that way, and so did that sound last night." She didn't mention the hum she'd heard, not yet. It felt too fragile, too easy to dismiss as imagination. Tess nodded, her fingers tracing the scar on her knuckles. Creeks dry this time of year. Good place to hide tracks, or something heavier. Her tone was practical, but her eyes flicked to Clara, searching for a reaction. Tess knew the land better than most, having spent years reading its moods. If the bell was nearby, she'd spot the signs. Amos set his mug down. I'll check the barn first. If someone was out here in the storm, they might have sheltered there. Could be more clues. Jonah perked up, eager to move. I'll go with Amos. Barn's creepy as hell, but I'm not sitting here all day. Clara gave a curt nod. Fine. Tess, you're with me. We meet back here by noon. And keep your eyes open. Whoever did this isn't some drifter passing through. They knew what they were taking. The group split, their boots scuffing the porch as they stepped into the morning. The farmhouse stood solid behind them, its white paint chipped but proud, a beacon in the vastness of the fields. Beyond it, the land stretched unforgiving, its secrets buried in the folds of earth and stalk. Tess and Clara followed the bootprints' direction toward the creek, a half-mile trek through the wheat. The stalks parted reluctantly, brushing against their jeans with a soft hiss. The creek bed, dry and cracked, wound through a shallow gully bordered by cottonwoods, their leaves rustling like whispers. Clara's eyes scanned the ground, catching every snapped twig, every disturbed pebble. Tess moved ahead, her steps sure, pausing to crouch at a patch of churned mud. Here, Tess said, pointing to a faint track. Another boot print, matching the one by the oak, wide, deep, pressed hard into the earth. Same guy. Moving fast, by the stride. Clara knelt beside her, her fingers brushing the print's edge. Carrying the bell, maybe. But where to? There's nothing out here but dirt and sky. Tess stood, her gaze following the creek bed. Not nothing. Carver's shack is a mile downstream. If anyone's crazy enough to pull this, it's him. Old Man Carver was a fixture in Harlow's End, a grizzled hermit who lived in a sagging shack by the creek. He'd been there longer than Clara, maybe longer than the town itself. Folks said he'd lost his wife to a fire decades ago and never recovered, muttering about cursed land and debts unpaid. Clara had never trusted him, not since he'd tried to buy a strip of her land 10 years back, offering cash she knew he didn't have. Carver's a loner, Clara said, standing. But he's not stupid. Stealing a bell doesn't get him anything. Doesn't have to be about money, Tess replied, her voice low. Some folks take things just to prove they can. They followed the creek bed, the boot prints fading into harder ground. The cottonwoods thickened, their roots twisting like veins under the earth. Clara's hand rested on the knife she kept clipped to her belt, a habit from years of working alone. The hum she'd heard last night hadn't returned, but the memory of it prickled her skin. As they neared Carver's shack, a glint caught her eye, a metal fragment half buried in the dirt, small and rusted, like a piece of old hardware. She pocketed it, saying nothing. The shack came into view, a lean-to of weathered planks and tar paper, surrounded by junk, rusted cans, a broken wheelbarrow, a pile of warped boards. No sign of Carver. Tess circled the shack, her eyes sharp, while Clara knocked on the door. It creaked open, revealing a dark, cluttered interior that smelled of mildew and smoke. Empty. He's not here, Clara called, stepping back. But he's been around. Fire's still warm. Tess emerged from behind the shack, holding a scrap of cloth snagged on a nail. It was coarse, stained with mud, and torn at the edge. Could have come off a coat, she said. Matches the button, maybe. Clara's jaw tightened. Let's head back. This is starting to feel like a chase. At the barn, Amos and Jonah worked in silence, their flashlights cutting through the dusty air. The barn was a cavern of shadows, its rafters draped with cobwebs, its floor littered with straw and old tools. The smell of hay and motor oil hung heavy. Jonah poked at a pile of sacks, half expecting a rat to dart out, while Amos examined the walls, his fingers tracing the weathered planks. Anything? Jonah asked, his voice echoing. Amos shook his head. No tracks inside. But look at this. He pointed to a spot near the back door, where the dirt was scuffed, as if something heavy had been dragged. A faint smear of grease marked the floor, leading to a trapdoor half hidden under a pile of crates. Jonah's eyes widened. We've got a cellar? Since when? Since always, Amos said, his tone dry. Your gran doesn't use it much. Too damp for storage. They cleared the crates, revealing a rusted iron ring set into the trapdoor. Amos pulled, and the door groaned open, releasing a gust of cold, stale air. A wooden ladder descended into darkness. Jonah hesitated, his flashlight shaking slightly. You sure about this? Amos clapped a hand on his shoulder. Stay close. They climbed down, the ladder creaking under their weight. The cellar was small, its walls damp stone, its floor packed dirt. Empty shelves lined one side, coated in dust. Amos swept his flashlight across the space, pausing on a corner where the dirt was freshly disturbed, as if someone had dug and covered it back up. Someone's been here, Amos said, crouching. He scraped at the dirt, revealing a small, metal object, a second brass button, identical to the one from the oak, its spiral etching catching the light. Jonah's breath caught. That's no coincidence. Before Amos could respond, a sound echoed above, a sharp crack, like wood snapping. They froze, their flashlights swinging toward the ladder. Footsteps, heavy and deliberate, crossed the barn floor overhead. Jonah's heart pounded. Someone's up there, he whispered. Amos stood, his hand on the ladder. Stay quiet. We'll check it out. They climbed back up, emerging into the barn just as the footsteps faded. The back door stood open, swaying slightly in the breeze. Jonah ran to it, his flashlight sweeping the field beyond, but the wheat swallowed any sign of movement. Amos joined him, his face grim. Whoever it was, they're gone, Amos said. But they know we're looking. By noon, the group reconvened at the farmhouse, the kitchen table now cluttered with their findings, the metal fragment from the creek, the torn cloth, the second brass button. Clara laid out the note again, its words, the bell tolls, staring back like a taunt. The clues pointed to someone local, someone bold, but they were no closer to the bell. Tess leaned forward, her voice steady. Carver's shack is empty, but he's been there recently. That cloth could be his. And those buttons, old, handmade. Not something you buy at the general store. Amos nodded. The cellar's been used, too. Someone's hiding something, and they're not far. Jonah fidgeted, his eyes darting to the window. What if it's not just about the bell? That note, it's creepy. Like they're playing with us. Clara's hand closed around the metal fragment in her pocket. It was small, curved, with a faint ridge, part of a hinge, maybe, or a clasp. She didn't mention it yet, it felt like a piece of a puzzle she couldn't see. We're not playing, she said. Tomorrow, we track Carver down. And we check the Burke's land. They've been too quiet lately. As the group dispersed, Clara stepped onto the porch, the windmill's creak filling the silence. The fields were still, but she felt watched, the air thick with something unspoken. Then it came again, the low, human hum, faint but clear, rising from the creek. This time, it wasn't just her. Tess froze beside her, her eyes wide. You heard that, too? Tess whispered. Clara nodded, her heart pounding. We're not alone out here. The morning after the chilling hum echoed from the creek, the Hanson farm felt smaller, as if the fields themselves were closing in. The sun struggled through a haze of gray clouds, casting a muted light over the wheat, which swayed uneasily in a fitful breeze. The air smelled of damp earth and something sharper, like ozone before a storm. Clara Hanson stood on the porch, her hands gripping the railing, the metal fragment from the creek bed, a piece of a rusted hinge, still tucked in her pocket. The note, the buttons, the torn cloth, and now that eerie sound, each clue tightened the knot in her chest. This wasn't just about a stolen bell anymore. Something older, heavier, was stirring in Harlow's End. Inside the kitchen, the group gathered, their faces drawn. Jonah sat hunched over a mug of coffee, his fingers tapping nervously. Tess leaned against the counter, her scarf-like knuckles flexing as she studied the brass button from the cellar. Amos stood by the window, his eyes on the horizon, where the Burke's farm lay just beyond a line of scraggly pines. The hum they'd heard last night lingered in their minds, unspoken but impossible to ignore. We're wasting time, Clara said, her voice cutting through the tension. Carver's not at his shack, but he's out there somewhere. And the Burkes, they've been too quiet. We checked their land today, and we keep looking for tracks. Tess nodded, slipping the button into her pocket. The creek bed's a start, but it's tricky ground. Roots, rocks, dry clay, it hides more than it shows. If someone's moving something heavy like that bell, they're not going far without leaving a mark. Amos turned from the window, his expression grim. Burkes have that old barn by the fence line. It's half fallen in, but it's big enough to hide something. And they've got no love for you, Clara, not since the land dispute. The dispute was an old wound, festering since Clara's father refused to sell a strip of pasture to the Burkes 20 years ago. The fence line between their properties was a constant source of bickering, cows straying, posts knocked down, barbed wire cut. Clara didn't trust them, but stealing a bell felt too petty for their usual grudges. Still, it was a lead. Jonah, you're with me and Tess, Clara said. Amos, check the town. See if anyone's heard from Carver or seen anything strange. Folks talk at the store. Jonah groaned but stood, grabbing his jacket. Why do I always get stuck with the creepy fields? Because you're young and your legs work, Clara snapped, though her eyes softened briefly. Let's move. The trek to the Burke's fence line was a mile across uneven ground, the wheat giving way to patches of wild grass and thistle. The creek ran parallel, its dry bed a jagged scar through the landscape. Tess led the way, her eyes scanning for tracks, while Clara kept a hand on her knife, her senses sharp. Jonah trailed behind, kicking stones, his flashlight swinging even in daylight. The wind carried the faint creak of the Hanson windmill, a reminder of home growing smaller behind them. At the fence, a sagging stretch of barbed wire and weathered posts, Tess stopped, crouching to examine the ground. Here, she said, pointing to a patch of disturbed earth. The soil was scuffed, with faint drag marks leading toward the Burke side. Something heavy went through. Could be the bell. Clara's eyes narrowed as she studied the marks. They were wide, uneven, as if someone had struggled under a load. Or something else, she muttered, thinking of the hinge in her pocket. A bell didn't need hinges, but a chest or a trapdoor might. They crossed the fence, careful not to snag their clothes, and approached the Burke's barn. It loomed ahead, a hulking skeleton of gray wood, its roof caved in on one side, its doors hanging crooked. The air around it felt stale, heavy with the smell of rotting hay and something metallic. Jonah hesitated, his flashlight flicking on instinctively. This place looks like it's gonna collapse. Stay sharp, Clara said, pushing the door open. It groaned, revealing a cavernous interior littered with broken beams and rusted tools. Sunlight streamed through gaps in the roof, painting the floor in jagged stripes. Tess moved inside, her boots silent on the dirt, while Clara scanned the shadows. Over here, Tess called, her voice low. She knelt by a pile of old sacks, pulling one aside to reveal a shallow hole in the dirt floor. Inside was a single iron nail, long and hand-forged, like something from a century ago. Someone's been digging, she said. Not deep, but recent. Jonah peered over her shoulder, his voice hushed. For the bell? Clara shook her head, her mind racing. Too small. But they were looking for something. She pocketed the nail, its weight joining the hinge in her pocket. Both felt like pieces of a puzzle, but the picture was still out of reach. As they searched the barn, a shout came from outside. Hey! What the hell are you doing? It was Nate Burke, the youngest of the Burke brothers, striding toward them with a scowl. He was broad-shouldered, with a sunburned face and a temper that flared like dry tinder. His jeans were caked with mud, and his boots, Clara noted, were wide, like the prints they'd found. Just looking, Clara said, stepping out to meet him. Our bell's gone. You know anything about that? Nate's eyes narrowed, his fists clenching. You're on my land, Hanson. Accusing me of theft? That's low, even for you. We found tracks, Tess said, stepping beside Clara. Leading from our place to yours. Care to explain? Nate's jaw worked, but he didn't answer right away. His gaze flicked to the barn, then back to Clara. You got no business here. Get out before I call my brothers. Jonah, still inside the barn, called out, Gran, check this. He held up a piece of rope, frayed but thick, identical to the one cut from the oak. It was tangled in a pile of scrap near the back wall. Nate's face darkened. That's nothing. We got rope all over. Funny how it matches, Clara said, her voice cold. We're not done, Nate. Not by a long shot. Nate took a step forward, but Tess moved faster, her stance steady. Back off, Burke. We're leaving. For now. They retreated, the rope clutched in Jonah's hand, Nate's glare burning into their backs. The drag marks, the nail, the rope, it was all pointing to the Burkes, but Clara's gut told her it was too neat, too easy. As they crossed back over the fence, the wind picked up, carrying that low hum again, faint but unmistakable, from somewhere deeper in the fields. Back in town, Amos moved through the general store, its shelves stocked with canned goods and farm supplies. The air smelled of coffee and dust, and the clerk, Mrs. Delaney, leaned over the counter, her eyes bright with gossip. Carver? Ain't seen him in days, she said. But he was in last week, buying salt and twine. Muttering about settling debts. Sounded off, even for him. Amos nodded, his mind turning. Salt and twine weren't unusual, but Carver's talk of debts was. He stepped outside, scanning the empty street, when he noticed a faint mark on the ground near the store's hitching post, a boot print, wide and deep, like the one by the oak. Beside it, half covered in dust, was a small, carved stone, no bigger than a walnut, etched with a spiral that matched the buttons. He pocketed the stone, his heart sinking. The clues were piling up, but they were scattered, like seeds thrown to the wind. Carver, the Burkes, the hum, it was all connected, but how? By evening, the group reconvened at the farmhouse, their findings spread on the table, the nail, the rope, the carved stone. Clara added the hinge from her pocket, its rusted curve catching the light. "This isn't just about the bell," she said. "Someone's digging, hiding, moving things. And that hum, it's not the wind." Tess frowned, her fingers tracing the stone spiral. "Carver's shack, the Burke's barn, the cellar, someone circling us, leaving crumbs." Jonah's eyes widened. What if it's not one person? What if it's bigger? Amos leaned forward, his voice steady. "We need to find Carver. He's the key. But we're running out of daylight, and these fields," he paused, glancing at Clara. "They're not safe at night." Clara nodded, her hand closing around the hinge. "Tomorrow, we go to the old mine. Carver used to talk about it, said it was where the land remembers. If he's hiding, that's where he'll be." As they prepared to rest, a sharp crack split the air outside, a gunshot, echoing from the direction of the creek. Jonah jumped, his chair scraping the floor. Tess grabbed her flashlight, already moving toward the door. Clara's heart raced, but she held up a hand, her voice steady. "Wait," she said. "We go together. Whoever's out there, they're not playing anymore." The gunshot's echo lingered in the night air, sharp and cold, as Clara Hanson led her group toward the creek. The moon hung low over Harlow's End, casting a pale glow across the wheat fields, their stalks silvered and restless. The windmill's creak was a distant heartbeat, drowned out by the crunch of boots on dry grass. Clara gripped her flashlight, its beam slicing through the darkness, while Tess flanked her, her eyes scanning the shadows. Jonah trailed close, clutching the rope from the Burke's barn, his breath shallow. Amos brought up the rear, his steady presence a quiet reassurance, though his hand rested on the pocket where he kept the carved stone. The gunshot had come from the creek, and with it, the hum, low, human, and unmistakable, had returned, threading through the night like a warning. "We stay together," Clara said, her voice low but firm. "No one runs off. That shot wasn't an accident." Tess nodded, her scar-flecked hand hovering near the knife at her belt. "Could be a hunter, but this late? Doubt it. Someone sending a message." Jonah's voice trembled. "Or trying to scare us off." Amos said nothing, his eyes fixed on the creek bed ahead, where the cottonwoods loomed like sentinels. The clues, the brass buttons, the hinge, the nail, the stone, the rope, were piling up, but they were puzzle pieces from different corners, refusing to fit. The gunshot only tightened the knot of dread in Clara's chest. The bell's theft was no prank, it was a thread in a larger tapestry, one woven with intent. They reached the creek, its dry bed a cracked ribbon under the moonlight. The air smelled of dust and decayed leaves, tinged with something acrid, gunpowder. Tess crouched, her flashlight sweeping the ground. "Here," she said, pointing to a fresh scuff in the dirt, a boot print matching the others. Beside it lay a spent rifle casing, glinting faintly. "Recent," Amos said, picking it up. "Still warm. Whoever fired is close." Clara's gaze followed the creek toward the old mine, a mile downstream. Carver's name hung unspoken between them. His shack had been empty, his talk of debts and cursed land echoing in their minds. The mine, an abandoned silver operation from the 1800s, collapsed and forgotten, was a place even Clara avoided. Its entrance was hidden in a rocky outcrop, overgrown with thistle and scrub, but Carver had mentioned it once, his eyes distant, as if it held secrets only he understood. "We head for the mine," Clara said. "If Carver's out here, that's where he'll be." Jonah hesitated, his flashlight shaking. "Gran, that place is bad news. Kids say it's haunted. What if?" "No ghosts," Clara snapped, though her own pulse quickened. "Just a thief. And we're getting answers." The trek to the mine was slow, the terrain growing rougher as the creek bed gave way to rocky ground. The cottonwoods thinned, replaced by jagged boulders and patches of dry grass. The hum came again, faint but persistent, seeming to rise from the earth itself. Tess stopped, her head tilted. "It's not the wind," she said. "It's mechanical, almost. Like a motor, but wrong." Clara nodded, her hand tightening on the hinge in her pocket. It was small, rusted, but its weight felt like a key to something she couldn't yet name. They pressed on, the mine's entrance coming into view, a dark maw in the rock, framed by splintered timbers. Vines clung to the opening, and a rusted chain hung across it, snapped in two. "Someone's been here," Amos said, kneeling to examine the chain. Cut clean, like the bell rope. Jonah's flashlight darted around, catching glints of quartz in the rock. This place gives me the creeps. Tess pushed past him, stepping into the mine's mouth. Her beam revealed a narrow tunnel, its walls damp and streaked with mineral veins. The air was cold, heavy with the smell of earth and something metallic. She paused, her foot nudging a small pile of dirt. "Look at this," she said, brushing it aside to reveal a third brass button, its spiral etching identical to the others. Clara's jaw tightened. That's no coincidence. Someone's leaving a trail. They moved deeper, the tunnel narrowing, the hum growing louder, not a motor, but a rhythmic pulse, like a heartbeat in the stone. The floor sloped downward, and Tess stopped again, her flashlight catching a glint of metal embedded in the wall, a rusted hinge, larger than the one in Clara's pocket, attached to a wooden panel. She pushed, and the panel creaked open, revealing a small alcove. Inside was a wooden chest, old and weathered, its lid carved with the same spiral as the buttons. It was locked, but the hinges matched the fragment Clara carried. Her heart pounded. "This is it," she said. "The bell's not here, but this chest, it's part of it." Before anyone could respond, a shadow moved at the tunnel's mouth. Jonah spun, his flashlight catching a figure, tall, cloaked in a heavy coat, face hidden in the dark. The figure froze, then bolted, footsteps echoing as they vanished into the night. "After them!" Tess shouted, sprinting toward the entrance. Jonah followed, his fear forgotten, but Clara grabbed his arm. "No," she said. "We're not chasing shadows. Not yet." Amos examined the chest, his fingers tracing the lock. "This is old, older than the bell. Hand-carved, handmade lock. Whoever took the bell wanted us to find this." Jonah's voice was shrill. "Why? To mess with us? That note, the buttons, now this? It's like a game." Clara's eyes darkened. "It's not a game. It's a message." She pulled the note from her pocket, the bell tolls, and held it up. "This chest, the buttons, the hum, it's all connected. And I think the Burkes know more than they're saying." Back at the farmhouse, the group gathered under the kitchen's harsh light, the chest's existence a new weight between them. Clara set the hinge fragment on the table beside the nail, the rope, the buttons, and the carved stone. The clues were mounting, but they were still a jigsaw with missing pieces. The gunshot, the figure in the mine, the hum, it all pointed to something bigger than a stolen bell. Tess broke the silence. "The Burkes' barn had that rope, and Nate was too quick to run us off. Now this chest in the mine? It's not Carver alone. The Burkes are in this." Amos nodded, turning the carved stone in his hand. "This spiral, it's not random. I've seen it before, in old land deeds at the town hall. It's a mark from the original settlers, tied to the mine. Maybe the bell's theft is about more than your family, Clara." Jonah's eyes widened. "Like what? Some old grudge?" Clara's mind raced, memories of her grandfather's stories surfacing, tales of the mine, of land disputes, of promises broken. The bell had been hung when the Hansons claimed their land, but what if it was more than a marker? What if it was a symbol, tied to something buried in that chest? "We need to open it," she said. "But not here. Not until we know who's watching." As they planned their next move, a knock came at the door, sharp, insistent. Clara opened it to find Nate Burke standing on the porch, his face pale, his hands empty. "We need to talk," he said, his voice low. "It's about the bell, and what's buried with it." Before Clara could respond, the hum rose again, louder now, vibrating through the floorboards. It wasn't coming from the creek or the mine, it was closer, under the house itself. Jonah's face went white. "Gran, what the hell is that?" Clara's hand closed around the hinge fragment, her heart racing. The chest, the hum, Nate's sudden arrival, everything was shifting, and the truth was closer than ever. But so was the danger. The hum pulsed through the floorboards of the Hanson farmhouse, a low, rhythmic vibration that set Clara's teeth on edge. It was no longer a distant echo from the creek or the mine, it was here, beneath them, like a secret clawing its way to the surface. Nate Burke stood on the porch, his sunburned face pale under the moonlight, his eyes darting as if he expected something to leap from the shadows. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and the faint tang of gunpowder lingering from the earlier shot. Clara gripped the hinge fragment in her pocket, its rusted edge biting into her palm, as she faced Nate. The note, the bell tolls, the brass buttons, the carved stone, the rope, the nail, and now the chest in the mine were all pieces of a puzzle, and Nate's presence was no coincidence. "What do you know about the bell?" Clara demanded, her voice steady despite the hum shaking the air. Tess stood beside her, her scarf-flecked hand hovering near her knife. while Jonah and Amos flanked the doorway, their faces tense. The kitchen table behind them was cluttered with clues, each one a thread in a tapestry that was finally starting to take shape. Nate raised his hands, palms out. "I ain't here to fight, Clara. But you're digging into something you don't understand. That bell, it's not just yours. It's tied to the land, to the mine, to things we buried." Jonah's eyes widened. "Buried? What's that supposed to mean?" Nate's gaze flicked to the floor, where the hum was strongest. "Let me in. I'll explain. But we gotta be quick. They're watching." Clara hesitated, her instincts warring. The Burkes had been enemies for years, their feud over the fence line a constant thorn. But Nate's voice carried a tremor she hadn't heard before, fear, not anger. She stepped aside, letting him in. "Talk fast," she said, closing the door. Nate stood awkwardly in the kitchen, his boots leaving dirt on the linoleum. The bell was cast for the mine, back when it was still running. "My great-grandfather and yours, Clara, they were partners, working the silver vein. But there was a collapse in '92. Men died. The town blamed our families, said we cut corners, ignored warnings. They hung the bell to mark the land, to warn folks away. But it wasn't just a warning. It was a promise." Clara's jaw tightened. Her grandfather had never spoken of the mine, only of the bell's place in their family. A promise to what? Nate swallowed, his eyes on the floor. To keep something hidden. Something they found down there, deeper than the silver. They locked it in a chest, sealed it in the mine. The bell was supposed to stay put, to keep people from digging too close. Tess leaned forward, her voice sharp. "You're saying the bell's a marker for some secret? And someone stole it to get to this chest?" Nate nodded. "I didn't know till recently. My dad, he told me before he died last year. Said the Hansons and Burke swore to protect it. But someone's after it now. Those buttons, that hum, it's them." "Who's them?" Amos asked, his calm voice cutting through the tension. Nate's face darkened. "I don't know. But Carver, he's been talking about the mine for years, saying it's owed something. I thought he was crazy, but after that gunshot tonight, I think he's working with someone." The hum grew louder, a deep thrum that rattled the cups on the table. Jonah jumped, his flashlight swinging toward the floor. "It's coming from the cellar," he whispered. Clara's heart pounded. The cellar, where Amos and Jonah had found the second button, the disturbed dirt. She grabbed her flashlight. "We're checking it now. Nate, you're coming with us." The trapdoor in the barn creaked open, releasing a gust of cold, stale air. The ladder descended into darkness, and the hum was unmistakable now, a pulsing rhythm that seemed to vibrate in their bones. Clara went first, her boots steady on the rungs, followed by Tess, Nate, Jonah, and Amos. The cellar's stone walls glistened with damp, and the air smelled of earth and rust. Their flashlights cut through the gloom, revealing the same shelves and packed dirt floor, but the hum led them to the corner where the soil had been disturbed before. Tess knelt, her fingers brushing the dirt. "It's looser now. Someone's been back." She dug, revealing a wooden panel, its edges worn but solid. A rusted hinge, identical to the one in Clara's pocket, was bolted to one side, and a heavy lock secured it. The spiral carving from the buttons and the stone was etched into the wood. Nate's breath caught. "That's it. The chest from the mine, it's not there anymore. They moved it here." "Who moved it?" Clara snapped, her flashlight on Nate's face. He shook his head. "I swear, I don't know. I thought it was still sealed in the mine until tonight." Amos examined the lock, his fingers tracing the spiral. "This is old, like the chest we saw. But the lock's been tampered with, scratches, fresh ones." Jonah's voice was shrill. "What's in it? Why's it worth all this?" Nate's eyes dropped. "My dad said it's papers. Deeds, maybe, or proof of something. Something that could ruin both our families if it got out." Clara's mind raced. Deeds? Her grandfather had fought to keep the farm through droughts and bank loans, but he'd never mentioned the mine or a partnership with the Burkes. The bell, the chest, the hum, it was all tied to a secret buried for a century. But why steal the bell? To signal the chest was vulnerable? Or to draw attention to it? Tess pulled a crowbar from her belt, wedging it into the lock. "Let's find out." The lock groaned but held. The hum intensified, a low growl now, and the air felt charged, like before a lightning strike. Then, a sharp crack echoed above, not a gunshot, but wood splintering. The barn door. "Someone's here," Amos whispered, his hand on Jonah's shoulder. Clara's flashlight swung toward the ladder, catching a shadow moving across the barn floor above. Heavy footsteps retreated, fading into the night. Tess sprang up, crowbar in hand, but Clara grabbed her arm. Not yet. We open this first. With a final heave, Tess broke the lock, the panel swinging open to reveal a small, iron-bound chest, its surface carved with spirals. The hum stopped abruptly, leaving a silence that pressed against their ears. Clara lifted the lid, her hand steady despite her racing heart. Inside were papers, yellowed, brittle, tied with twine. A single photograph slipped free, showing two men in old-fashioned clothes standing by the mine, the bell hanging between them. One was her great-grandfather, the other, unmistakably a Burke. But beneath the papers was something else, a small, rusted device, no bigger than a fist, with gears and a coiled spring. It was silent now, but Clara knew it was the source of the hum. A timer? A signal? She didn't know, but its presence felt like a warning. Jonah's voice broke the silence. Gran, look at the back. Scrawled on the chest's lid, in fresh chalk, were 3 words, the dead is due. Clara's blood ran cold. The note from the oak, the hum, the buttons, it wasn't just a theft. It was a reckoning. Someone knew the secret of the chest, and they were coming for it. Before anyone could speak, a new sound cut through the silence, a low, guttural laugh from the barn above. Not Carver's voice, not Nate's, but something colder, unfamiliar. Footsteps circled the trapdoor, deliberate and slow, as if daring them to climb up. Tess gripped the crowbar, her eyes fierce. We're not alone. Clara closed the chest, her mind racing. The bell was still out there, but the chest was the key, and someone was willing to kill to keep its secrets buried. The laugh from the barn above was a blade in the dark, cold and sharp, cutting through the silence of the Hanson cellar. Clara Hanson clutched the iron-bound chest, its carved spirals rough under her fingers, the photograph and strange device inside it heavy with secrets. The hum had stopped, but the air vibrated with something else, danger, close and real. Tess gripped her crowbar, her eyes locked on the trapdoor. Jonah's flashlight trembled, casting jagged shadows on the damp stone walls. Amos stood steady, his hand on Jonah's shoulder, while Nate Burke, pale and tense, muttered, I told you, Clara. They're here. Who? Clara snapped, her voice low but fierce. The chalked words on the chest, the dead is due, burned in her mind. The bell's theft, the buttons, the hinge, the nail, the rope, the carved stone, all led to this moment, to the truth buried under a century of silence. The footsteps above circled, slow and deliberate, then stopped. A voice called down, raspy but clear. Bring it up, Hanson. No need for more trouble. Clara's heart pounded. It wasn't Carver's voice, nor any Burke she knew. She nodded to Tess, who climbed the ladder first, crowbar ready. Clara followed, the chest tucked under her arm, with Jonah, Amos, and Nate close behind. The barn's air was thick with dust and the smell of old hay, the moonlight streaming through cracked boards. In the center stood a man, tall, lean, in a long coat, his face half hidden by a wide-brimmed hat. A rifle rested in his hands, not raised but ready. Beside him, slumped against a bale, was Old Man Carver, his hands bound, his face bruised. Carver? Clara said, her voice tight. You're with him. Carver shook his head, his eyes wild. Didn't want this. He made me. Said the land's owed its due. The man in the coat stepped forward, his boots scuffing the dirt. Name's Elias Ward, he said, his voice like gravel. My kin worked that mine with yours, Hanson. And the Burkes. He nodded at Nate. They found something down there, gold, not silver. Your great-grandfathers kept it, hid it, left the workers to die when the mine collapsed. That chest holds the proof. Deeds, letters, a map to the vein. And that bell? It was their marker, their lie. Clara's grip tightened on the chest. The photograph, her great-grandfather and a Burke by the bell, flashed in her mind. You stole it, she said. You left the buttons, the notes. Elias smirked. Had to get your attention. Carver here helped, thought he'd get a cut. But it's not about money. It's about justice. Tess stepped forward, crowbar raised. Justice doesn't mean shooting at us. Elias's eyes narrowed. That was a warning. You're standing on stolen land, built on blood. Hand over the chest, and this ends clean. Jonah's voice cracked. Gran, don't. He's lying. Amos spoke, calm but firm. He's not. I checked the town records. The mine's collapse wasn't an accident. Corners were cut, men died, and the Hansons and Burkes walked away richer. That device in the chest, it's a signal, old tech to mark the gold vein. It's been humming since the bell was moved, like a beacon. Clara's stomach churned. Her family's legacy, the farm she'd fought for, was built on a lie. She looked at Nate, who wouldn't meet her eyes. "You knew," she said. "Not till my dad told me," Nate muttered. "I didn't want this. I just wanted the feud to end." Elias raised the rifle, his patience thinning. "The chest, Hanson. Now." Clara's mind raced. The bell was still out there, but the chest was the heart of it. She couldn't let Elias have it, not yet. "Where's the bell?" she asked, stalling. Elias gestured toward the barn's back wall, where a tarp covered a bulky shape. Tess yanked it aside, revealing the bell, its iron surface glinting dully, the rope still attached. But something was wrong. Scratched into its surface was the same spiral as the buttons, fresh and deliberate. "You marked it," Clara said, her voice cold. "Why?" "To remind you," Elias said. "The land remembers. And so do I." Carver struggled against his ropes, his voice hoarse. "He's not alone, Clara. Others know. They'll come for it." Before Clara could respond, Tess lunged, swinging the crowbar at Elias. He dodged, the rifle firing wild, the shot splintering a beam above. Jonah dove for cover, Amos tackling Carver out of the way. Clara clutched the chest, backing toward the bell. "Tess, stop," she shouted. Tess froze, breathing hard, as Elias steadied the rifle. But his eyes weren't on her, they were on the chest. "Last chance," he said. Clara's hand found the bell's rope, her fingers tracing its frayed edge. She thought of her grandfather, the farm, the weight of history. Then she thought of the men who died in the mine, their families left with nothing. She set the chest down, slowly, and stepped back. "Take it," she said. "But you're wrong if you think this ends anything." Elias grabbed the chest, his eyes gleaming, but as he turned to leave, the hum returned, louder, sharper, shaking the barn. The device inside the chest was alive again, its gears clicking. Elias froze, confusion crossing his face. Then the ground trembled, a low rumble rising from below. "The mine," Amos whispered. "It's unstable. Moving the chest must have triggered something." The rumble grew, dust falling from the rafters. Elias bolted, chest in hand, but the barn door slammed shut, locked from the outside. A second figure, another stranger, coat marked with a spiral, stood beyond, visible through the cracks. "You're not the only one, Ode," the figure called, then vanished into the night. The ground shook harder, and Clara grabbed Jonah, pulling him toward the back door. Tess freed Carver, who stumbled, muttering apologies. Nate hesitated, then helped Amos drag the bell toward the exit. They spilled into the field as the barn groaned, its roof sagging. The hum stopped, but the rumble didn't. They ran, the wheat swallowing them, until they reached the farmhouse. The ground stilled, but the air was heavy, the night too quiet. Clara looked back, the barn still standing but leaning precariously. Elias was gone, the chest with him, but the bell was theirs again. By morning, Harlow's End was abuzz. The sheriff arrived, too late to catch Elias or his accomplice. The bell was rehung in the oak, its surface scarred but whole. Clara sat on the porch, Jonah beside her, the weight of the truth settling in. The papers in the chest, now lost, would have exposed her family's greed, but they'd also have torn the town apart. Nate, shamefaced, promised to end the feud, to share the truth with his brothers. Tess cleaned her crowbar, her eyes on the horizon. "Elias will be back," she said. "That chest wasn't the end." Amos nodded, the carved stone still in his pocket. "The mine's still there. So's the gold." Clara looked at Jonah, his young face hardened by the night. "We don't hide anymore," she said. "Our family did wrong, but we'll make it right. Together." The bell tolled, a single, deep note echoing over the fields. It was no longer just a marker, it was a reminder. The land remembered, and so would they. But as the sound faded, a faint hum lingered, distant, from the direction of the mine. The debt wasn't paid, not yet.